So, what kind of takeaways did you guys have from this? From the paper?
Go ahead.
So would somebody like with AI damage be able to recall kind of their own past emotional experiences and discuss?
I don't know. I saw that in discussion. I assume that was you. I'm not really sure. I can't really tell.
Could you repeat the question?
I was wondering if like somebody with AI damage would be able to recall their own past emotional experiences and discuss.
Yeah, I don't know. How does it affect memory? Did it say anything about that? No? So if it doesn't say that it affects memory, then it seems like if that was the only damage you had, then you might still be able to remember. Yeah.
Well, I would be curious to, like, related to that, it said that they did engage in more, like, disgusting behaviors, so depending on how, like, severe that is, I feel like there has to be some impairment of memory, because if they're, like, I don't know what, like, if they're, like, picking their nose or something in front of people, like, I feel like even if you have damage to a part of your brain that recognizes disgust, you have enough memory to know, like, adults don't do that, you know? So I feel like depending on how severe that is,
I don't know.
That memory is.
Do you guys think that's a memory function?
Well, like social norms, I think you might have to remember what social norms are in some way. Because it's a learned thing, it's a learned behavior. So I don't know how much memory it would be, but I would think it would have something to do with that. Or you might remember an experience of, like feeling ashamed or something when you did that and someone told you to stop because it was gross.
Right, but you might have like the memory, or you might have learned from that. But after a lesion like this or degenerative disease, then you might not. You still know that it's not what you're supposed to do.
But you don't care.
But you still do it, especially with those two diseases that we talked about.
So I looked up what the disgusting behaviors were. Did anybody else do that? Oh, go ahead.
Well, I thought it'd be interesting if they had them define their own behaviors to see how they interpreted what they were doing.
Yeah, that would be. I can't remember if I know they talked to them extensively, but I don't think they reported any of that in here. Do you guys want me to tell you what these disgusting behaviors were? So the way they did this was pretty smart, actually. They had a couple of different people read their charts, and they got their agreement on whether or not there was disgusting behavior, and there were only 3 disagreements out of all of them. It was 100% except for those 3. So they included things like does not wash for weeks, eats rotten foods, incest, lack of concern regarding feces on clothing, pets dead animals. So it says behaviors were considered disgusting only if the behavior did not occur in healthy subjects. So they had asked all the healthy subjects. And was of sufficient degree or frequency to be considered unusual. So, for example, leaves dirty dishes in the sink was not considered disgusting. I was relieved to learn that. Behaviors that appeared to result from impulsivity or general social insensitivity without a disgusting element were not included. So compulsive masturbation is not considered disgusting, it's just inappropriate. Masturbating with a dead animal would be considered disgusting. Okay, so you guys see the difference? Is there anybody in here who doesn't get the difference besides Sasha? So I think it says their reviewers were blind to patient's diagnosis, reviewed the charts independently, and so as I said, the agreement was really high, and then they had some specific examples that were pretty amazing. Pick up an unfinished bottle on the sidewalk and drink it. Use cloth shower curtain as toilet paper. Let's see. Urinating on the carpet near her bed. Let's see. Meats, moldy lemons, and apple cores. stopped using toilet paper. All right, so these are all behaviors that, what do these things have in common, would you say? I'll get over here so you can see me actually. Yes?
I was saying that they're all things that I wouldn't even like have to consider whether or not to do. It's just I just like instinctively don't do them.
Do you think you did them when you were an infant?
Hopefully not.
Yes?
I just told Sasha, like, that sounds like something my son would do.
Drink off out of a...
The water, like just finding a cup or water bottle somewhere and picking up and drinking it. And I'm like, no, you left that outside. Like, please don't do that.
I drank a whole bunch of fruit flies yesterday by accident, but they're small.
My son took his face in a bird bath and drank water out of the bird bath.
Oh dear.
Sunday. Yeah.
So that's true. They are all things that you would hopefully not have to think really hard about whether you should do. Anybody have another idea about what they all kind of have in common, Andrea?
A lot of them revolve around either bodily functions or like, well, I guess eating is still a bodily function, so a lot of them are revolving around bodily functions.
Yes. Now, why do you think we would have a kind of response to these kinds of things? What do you think?
I'd say because they're like learned since we were an infant, learn not to leave feces on our clothes or.
But why not? Yes.
To keep us safe and healthy.
Was that Andrea?
Yeah. An evolutionary advantage.
So yeah, these things are they're not good for you. I mean, it's not a good idea to eat moldy food or, wear your own poop because it has bad germs in it that can make you sick. Okay? It's unhealthy. Yeah.
Well, when you said that, it just made me think, like, did they pay attention to these people's, or maybe a different study, their, like, tastes? Like, I'm really picky, so, like, maybe, like, if I had damage to my insula, I would just like any food, because nothing's disgusting to me anymore.
So you can blame your picky eating child and have super good insulin. It's I don't think there was nothing like that I remember from but this is a really large sample of people with brain damage. I mean, it was very good in that regard, but they were just doing chart reviews, so for a lot of them, they didn't have the opportunity to talk to them. That was only some of them where they were able to do that. I don't know if you read the methods really carefully, but there was a lot of, this group of people, 14% of them had taken this test, and so there was a lot of, I should say, dishomogeneity or unhomogeneity in their sample because it's a clinical sample and they're very, you kind of have to take what you can get. So yeah, I don't think they had any information like that. So would you mind going back to the beginning? Okay, so does everybody remember where the insula actually is? Like if I ask you to tell me in words, where's the insula, what would you be able to say? I have the thing here. I'll put up. See, I was thinking ahead. I try to do that every once in a while. Hello? Okay. So, when you look at the side, when you have a lateral view of the brain, you can't see it. It's cortex, but it's like this sneaky hidden cortex. It's the brain, the cortex goes around, folds up under the frontal lobe, and then comes down like this. That's the insula. And then it goes up again and goes over the temporal lobe. So you see that here's the cortex folding under the frontal lobe. This is the insula, and now it's going back over the temporal lobe. So the insula is hidden from view. Yes?
is that still technically considered part of the temporal cortex, or is it completely separate?
It's really difficult for me to determine that. I actually have tried to figure that out on a couple of occasions, and I really couldn't tell you. I just don't know. I mean, it seems like you'd have to draw a line in the middle of it to really be able to determine that. People just call it the insula. So, and then these areas are called the operculum, if you remember. And they are often closely related in function to, or related to what the insula is doing. So see this area here. So this is all the cortex that sticks out on the outside, plus the part that goes in. So going back to this, it's just one of those things where, you know, trying to name it, they just never came up with a clear determination of whether it goes with frontal or temporal. Also, you mentioned it was near the amygdala, so here it's very close to it, and there are connections between the two, white matter connections, so axons going back and forth. So going back to your So let's see, could you go to the next slide? Okay, so these two dementias, I don't know very much about the second one, but I know a little bit about this one. Frontotemporal dementia is absolutely horrific. It's really rapid, and it destroys people's emotions, and it's just a really horrible form of dementia to get, and it's not very common. So, you know, I think they did this research in Northern California. Actually, I can't remember. Does anybody remember where I can look. It's hard to find samples that are big enough to do this kind of work. So, I imagine they were pulling from a large metropolitan area. Most of it looks like it's San Francisco area. So one of the authors of this study is Robert Levinson, whose name you might recall. I've mentioned it in the context of emotion research. So, and he was actually Dr. Roberts' advisor in graduate school. And his interest is emotion, so he got interested in studying frontotemporal dementia in particular because of what it tells us, what it can tell us about emotion. So the idea here is that they're using people with neurological disorders that cause lesions to examine whether or not particular areas of the brain are needed for certain emotional experiences. So based on that idea, do you think that this study is a convincing demonstration that you need the insula in order to fully experience disgust? What do you guys think about that? Yes,
I would
Maverick.
say, just like the amygdala, you probably don't need it, but it helps.
It helps.
Yeah.
So, let's.
There's other neural pathways that you created.
So now you're talking about recovery. So that's an excellent point. So the difference then between people who haven't had brain damage versus people who have had brain damage and have changed in some way after having that damage. So are those people the same? Probably not.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say is if it's caused by brain damage, I'm assuming there's a way to develop other pathways in order to experience disgust, but but from like my experience with my grandpa when I was younger, he had Alzheimer's disease, and then it became pretty progressive. So he would have some disgusting behaviors, not on his own accord, but because of his Alzheimer's, and that's is degenerative like dementia. So there's no going back from that.
But I guess the question is, it's like the same issue with the amygdala. So if people who have damage to certain aspects of their brain are unable to experience a particular emotion based on their behavior, okay? So we're not asking them, do you feel disgust, necessarily, although they may have had them rate disgust. I can't remember because I read about 6 articles and they're kind of all blended together in my mind. But the idea is if you experience feelings of disgust, you would not do these things. Like if you had a normal disgust reaction, you wouldn't use your shower curtain as toilet paper. That just, it's like, no, that's disgusting. Yes?
But then what's the difference between someone who uses a shower curtain as toilet paper opposed to someone who doesn't use toilet paper at all and just doesn't care about uses?
That's also disgusting, so there may not be much difference, except that the person using the shower curtain is more creative. But I mean, what I'm getting at is, if they're not experiencing disgust, and there's a part of the brain that is missing, what is wrong with making the assumption that that part of the brain is needed in order to experience disgust? I mean, what's the issue that you have with that? Yeah.
Well, I would, it's hard with something like dementia, because I feel like you can't really recover, like she was saying, like you don't come back from that. But say it was like a car accident, and somehow it only, like I don't know how that would happen, but somehow it only damaged your insula, nothing else. Like I feel like you could still do at least a lot of the like disgust related, you know, like avoiding behaviors that are disgusting or like recognizing them, but it would just, I feel like certain ones would be impaired more than others, and some of them you could learn again, and some of them you couldn't. You know, like maybe you won't do the disgusting behaviors, but you know, it would just be because of social groups, not because of disgust. You know.
So does everybody understand that this? Well, let me say that differently. Do you guys remember learning about the sort of the lesion method in studying the brain? So the idea being you get a collection of people with lesions, and then you look to see how their lesions overlap with each other. And you are studying a particular behavioral deficit. So you look to see if there's a part of the brain that is lesioned in every single one of those people who has that deficit, then you can draw the inference that that particular part of the brain is somehow crucial in the performance of that or the experience of that thing that now is deficient. Okay. So there is a particular kind of problem with that kind of inference that is not a fatal flaw, but it is something that you have to be concerned about. And so, does anybody have any idea what I'm talking about? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm trying to remember one of the things from our plasticity PowerPoint, but isn't it that behaviors can be caused by different brain damages? Are you getting at that? I don't.
Not exactly, because we do have overlapping lesions in this study. I mean, go to the picture, or the results picture. Yes, there you go, that. Okay, so I think what they're talking about here is that, so these areas were found kind of across the board to be deficient. So this is only, this is not a study of activation of the brain, it's a study of the amount of gray matter that it exists in particular parts of the brain. So it's a lesion study, just like we had overlapped the pictures, only we're doing it in a much more technologically advanced way. We're overlapping MRIs. And we're finding that people with less gray matter in these areas are more likely, significantly more likely to have these behaviors. And then we're finding that people with gray matter missing in these areas are less likely to recognize expressions of disgust when they see them or acting out. Because I guess it wasn't even pictures, it was actual videos of these actors being disgusted. And so these are lesion studies. So what we're saying is if you have damage in this area, you're more likely to do this to a pretty high degree. So what's the problem with saying that it's the stuff in this area that you need in order to experience that feeling? So this is kind of like the general problem with brain damage studies of all kinds, actually. Okay, I'm tired of trying to pull this out of you because I think you just don't understand what I'm getting at. Basically, the idea is that when there's brain damage in a particular area, it affects more than just that area. Okay, we know this from common sense, but also from, if you remember the brain damage lectures, for example, we know that if you damage one cell, that it can influence the cells on both sides of it. We know that these things are circuits. We know that they are patterns of activity that are extending across multiple different parts of the brain. And so if you have damage in a particular area, that doesn't mean that the only thing that's damaged is that particular area. Okay. So we're talking about gray matter volume here, but it's also fewer connections to other areas, right? Because what's connected to the other areas is the cells that comprise the gray matter, and if they're not there, the connections can't be there either. So it's kind of like an oversimplification to say that if this area is missing and people don't experience a particular kind of experience, that the experience itself is kind of found in that area. Okay, it involves that area, I would say. So I'd be willing to say that you need your insula to have full experience of disgust based on this study, but not that it's required to have disgust, and also not that the insula is the only thing that you need to have a full experience of disgust. Yeah.
It's like a weird metaphor, but is it kind of almost like if like a large rock hits your windshield, and instead of like just that one area, it kind of expands, like all the cracks go out. So if one area is damaged, then like it kind of spreads out into other areas. So like that
seems like a reasonable metaphor. Yeah, but go ahead, Catherine.
I was wondering if they did like a diffuse tensor imaging kind of thing for the control group that can experience disgust. Mm-hmm. If you could see the different connections that disgust has on the brain, I don't know if that would be beneficial in this kind of
It would. So that's basically. Well, going back to this picture, I really wish we could put one computer on one screen, and it would be so good. We've been asking for that for years, but do they give us that? No, they don't. Yeah, here we go. So this is not focused on the insula. But this one is focused on, or I should say, the insula probably is in this, but I don't feel comfortable saying exactly what is what. I know that it's towards the front of the brain, so this could be involved. This might be it right here. But the point is, this is the orbitofrontal cortex. The amygdala is down here. And look at all these connections between the two. So we know the amygdala also has multiple, many kinds of connections with other places. So it would be excellent to be able to study the activation in the insula and see where it's linked to other things. And people are now doing that. I mean, there's brain research has gone from being something that a biologist can understand to being something that you need to be a mathematician to really fully understand. I mean, it's become all about networks and frequency, resonance, different simultaneous activation of different areas based on the frequency spectrum, and just all kinds of really challenging things. But on the other hand, I mean, we are dealing with a really complex organ, and it takes complex methods to understand it. All right, so I would like to know what some of you guys' questions are, or discussion. So who's on deck for today? I know Valerie is, and she's not here. Naomi couldn't come. Andrew?
So because this was part of this study talked about like having a hard time recognizing disgust in others and like empathizing with people who are having disgust, I'd like to know like the impact that all of this has with mirror neurons.
So does anybody have any commentary about mirror neurons on this? Does anyone care to speculate about mirror neurons and what effect they might have? Yes.
With the mirror neurons, don't you usually have that it kind of stimulates the same part of the brain as what you're recognizing? So if you have a deficiency in the area of the brain that would cause you to perform it, you would not have that activation.
So, Andrea, are you asking like if a person who has insula damage would not be able to activate mirror neurons when they saw somebody vomit? Is that the kind of question you're asking?
Potentially, or even if like someone who has like some kind of deficit with their mirror neurons may also have an issue recognizing disgust and feeling disgust.
Oh, I see what you're getting at. So you're sort of talking about a different way that you would have a problem with recognizing an emotion. If your mirror neuron system was offline, you would have problems recognizing emotion. That's a really good point. We do know that there are other areas of the brain that are involved in recognizing emotion besides just the insula. And that the insula is involved in recognizing emotions other than disgust. You had a question.
Well, it kind of goes back a little bit to what you were saying before, but it just makes me think of like in my other class we were just learning about the aphages and
About what?
Aphages,
Okay.
like, of language, and what was it? Articulate I don't know. The
Fasciculus.
connection between
The
broca's
articulate fasciculus. You said it's a
Yeah.
fasciculus, but which one? Uncinate? The uncinate
No,
fasciculus was the one we
before-
learned about.
Not in this study, but in like the I think it was conduction aphasia, where that's broken and Broca's and Wernicke's areas are fine,
Mhm.
but that connection is
Mhm.
broken. So it kind of makes me think maybe the insula is kind of like just a connecting area
Mhm.
to where the area of the brain that needs to get that information is getting it.
Well, that's why I was saying you can't be certain that it's that the experience resides in the amygdala. It seems like either the connections from it or something that's going on in it is important, but not all there is to it. Let's see, I had another question down here. What do you think about the idea of using disgusting behavior as an indicator of whether a person experiences the feeling of disgust? Yeah.
I don't know how accurate that necessarily is. Because I think that people can still, like, they can act counter to their feelings. just because you act a certain way doesn't mean you don't recognize that what you're doing is, like, you could be horribly mean to someone, recognize that you're being horribly mean, and feel the guilt of it, but that doesn't mean that you don't feel guilt. You still do it.
You still do it. What do you guys think about that?
Well, they did say that they were also like less likely to feel empathy for other people. So I mean, if
Less
they don't
likely to
care,
feel what?
like the empathy, or and like feeling sorry for people. If you don't care what people think of you or how people feel, then you might not care if you're doing something disgusting because you're like, I don't care about what you think.
So you're basically, what do you think about the idea that you feel feelings of disgust, but still continue to behave in a way that activates those feelings? You guys can duke it out, and then one of you can.
No, I think
I think engaging in disgusting behavior and feelings of disgust is more closely related than being mean to someone and feeling guilty about it, because if you're engaging in disgusting behavior, that's affecting you. So I feel like it's a little different.
Go ahead.
I think that's fair, but I think that there's also plenty of times where people engage in behavior that they personally view disgusting, and they still do it. For example, someone who's like a homophobe, still engaging in homosexual activities, like they see those behaviors as disgusting, but they still engage in them.
So there's other reasons, there's other rewards or something that they're getting out of it that is overcoming, or go ahead, Marin.
I know they gave them scales of depression. I don't remember how many people were depressed. But you think if you were like severely depressed, you might know that you're doing something disgusting, but you wouldn't care because you're so depressed. You just don't care about it.
Yeah, or go ahead.
I was going to say, like, people that, like, use your question, that get used to, like, drinking alcohol that tastes disgusting. And they're an
Does it?
alcoholic.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
Or, like, chewing tobacco or something, like, something disgusting. People chew tobacco, even though.
Yeah, that is disgusting.
Yeah,
Do they
addiction.
still find it disgusting, or do they?
Yes.
You also mentioned that it seems like a lot of these behaviors are kind of infantile, like before people learn that they're disgusting. So it might be something that they've learned it's disgusting, but they don't care anymore. Kind of like an infant might say, well, you think this is gross, but it doesn't bother me. Like, how many times do you tell kids not to eat their nose and eat it, and they still do it?
It's salty, you know.
So
I've heard. I've never actually done that because I was born, fully versed in social mores. So let's see then. So basically what you seem to be getting at is the idea that, one, there could be rewards associated with these behaviors that are stronger than the feelings of disgust. So that's a possibility. Another possibility is apathy, or I guess apathy might be a good description of what Marin was talking about, where you're so depressed that you just go ahead and urinate in bed because getting up just seems like it's not worth it to you. So that's another possibility. What about the idea that the feeling of disgust itself is no longer punishing to you? So, for example, the idea that I have to sort of try to get at this is anger. So, how many people find anger to be an unpleasant feeling? All of you say you find it unpleasant. Really? I mean, think about it. When you're mad at somebody and you tell them, you suck, that feels good for a second or two, right? And then you feel bad about having done it, but it's not so much the anger itself that is necessarily unpleasant. It's more the consequences of anger, I think. And then this may say something about me, I don't know. But I know that anger is considered to be an approach emotion. So when you're angry, you go towards, you don't go away from. And so I guess what I'm getting at is that we think of disgust as being unpleasant and punishing, but maybe it isn't necessarily so for everyone. So maybe they don't lose the experience of disgust, but they lose the punishing nature of disgust because they no longer care what other people think, right? So I just think the idea of using disgusting behavior as an indicator of whether a person feels disgust, it's probably better than anything else, but it's not a perfect indicator. So what would you do instead if you are dealing with a bunch of people that have serious brain damage? I guess you could ask them how they feel and have them rate their feelings or something, but I don't know if that would work in this kind of population. I have no experience with people like this. Yes?
I think you could probably just pull and kind of cross-reference them. So like if someone displays disgusting behaviors and use that behavior as disgusting. And I also would want to know, like, maybe there's some biological reaction that you can measure that disgust has on the body. So like some process, I'm not sure, but some process that it might trigger on your body that you could measure, and then like present them with vignettes of disgusting behaviors to see if they have that reaction.
That might be good, yes.
Well, I'm thinking like related to that is possibly they might not show the facial reaction of disgust, but they might, you know, their brain might process that, like, I need to make this facial reaction, you know, like when you're angry and your brow furrows, or you know, when you're disgusted. Maybe that could be a clue of like whether or not, you know, instead of just using subjective, like, yes, I feel disgusted or no, I don't, you know, if you look at the regions of your brain that would affect your face, you know.
What about, shoot, now I forgot what I was going to say. That's, I'm sure some kind of dementia is involved there. Crap, oh well, I'll think of it again in a minute. So, Andrew, could you repeat what you just said? No.
About the biological processes?
Yeah.
So I would wonder if there are biological processes that are triggered when you feel disgust that you could measure.
Okay, I remembered what I was going to say. Thank you for providing me with that cue. So what I was thinking about when Andrew was talking was not specifically about that, but what I had thought of was the idea of the feeling of disgust and its implications for behavior, so what we do, and the ability to recognize disgust. So how would you expect those things to be related, and sort of why? Like what implications, let's say if you're a person who has brain damage, you can't recognize disgust. What would that do to your behavior, maybe? So here I am, I'm doing something, I'm picking my nose and I'm about to eat it, right? So I look around the people around me and I see there's Nick, there's Jesse. I don't recognize the feelings of disgust that they are expressing. Would I be more or less likely to eat it? Right, so I'm wondering if not only the feeling of disgust keeps us from doing things, but it's a signal in a way. It's like we look at other people and we see what their reactions are because we care what other people think about. So if we don't care what other people think or can't recognize what they're thinking, then our behavior is socially inappropriate. So does anybody in here have any experience with severely demented patient populations? You do?
Just a little bit. I was at CNA for a while.
So can you talk to us at all about how, like, I guess it just depends on how far along people are, but are there preserved abilities and things, or do people just kind of go down all at once, or how does that work?
There's one woman, she like remembered her past for the most part. She was like a model way back when she was in the 20s, and she'd always make jokes about she was waiting for like Playboy to come find her or something. So she was still, she still has memories that way, but if you didn't check her to make sure she ate her food and took a shower, she'd probably go in if you didn't find her.
So she was living in a different part
It's
of
kind of like
it
she was living more
in the past. So I just wonder if you know, how much you can do with asking people. I guess they did ask them to recognize or not, yeah.
There was a couple of clients that I had when I was doing hair. There was a few clients I had when I was doing hair that, like, they would bring in their parents who had dementia. And there was a lady who, she liked to curse at people and flip them off, but she thought it was hilarious. So I don't know if she was doing it because she didn't recognize it was appropriate, or if she was doing it because she knew she could get away with it, and like people wouldn't care anymore. But she would just say things, or she would like go like this, you know, like hide her hand but flip somebody off, and she just thought it was the funniest thing in the world. And there was the other lady, she would get upset and then like refuse to talk to people. So she would just, when you would try to talk to her, she would just look away or just shake her head no. But she would make a face of disgust like that. She was just so irritated that you were even trying to talk to her. She didn't want to have anything to do with it. But then but she still really liked animals. So they would just like show her pictures of animals and stuff, and she'd be happy. But people, she would just be upset with people and didn't want to have anything to do with people.
So the first person that you described sounds like, so, I mean, I wouldn't say that what she was doing was disgusting. Because, I mean, if she was,
disgusting.
you know, using the F word,
Right.
it's not real. That's inappropriate, but it's not disgusting.
Right.
But it does sort of suggest that that there are other rewards to behaving in certain ways can be rewarding, you know, over and above whatever social impact they have, or possibly including, like if crapping in your bed really pisses off your caregiver, and you're pissed off at your caregiver all the time, then maybe crapping in your bed is like a way of getting to your caregiver. Just sort of hypothesizing. Yeah, Shayla.
Yeah, I used to work with a client who was a teenager who had autism. He used to play with his species a lot. He would laugh about it. And when you go into his mom, he wouldn't do it, she said. Maybe it was a way of getting back at us, or he wanted attention, I don't know what.
But it was more, there seemed to be some discrimination going on as to when he would do it and when he wouldn't do it. So it wasn't purely his lack of disgust. It had to be other things were involved in it. Interesting. That's very interesting. All right, so let's see. Anybody else have any questions or comments or speculations that they want to bring up? I can't remember all the people who are supposed to be blabbing today. Who are they? Not you, but you're welcome to go ahead.
Do you think it's possible to use like the slow route as opposed to right through the thalamus and then right through the insulin? So you kind of think about things before you actually feel the feelings?
I don't know if there is a route that goes from the sensory cortex to the thalamus to the insula, because I just can't remember. I don't know enough about the insula yet. I haven't taught it for many years yet, so I'm not positive. Does anybody else know the answer to that, or know whether that's the case? So what did you mean by that? That
Because when you feel those visceral feelings of disgust, it's not like automatic. Instead of thinking about if it's gross or not.
So that would be a fast route in a way, not a slow one. The slow one would involve thinking about it. Fast
Just
one.
going at it, it's not gross.
Yeah, I don't know. I wonder. It does seem like there would need to be a fast route to avoid disgusting things. I know that, for example, just a couple days ago, I was walking in my backyard, and just as I took a step, I was warned by the cloud of flies that rose up that I was about to step in a tiny gift from one of our dogs. And I was able to move my foot in midair and I almost fell over, but I was able to avoid stepping in it, and I'm sure I didn't have time to think about it. I mean, it was an instantaneous kind of in the middle of a movement, so that sort of suggests that disgust can trigger that immediate response.
I don't know if this is necessarily tied to disgust, but I was learning about in my sensation and perception class how we perceive, like how we get motion sickness is actually in a lot of ways tied to. Sorry, there's like a bug or something flying in front of me. Like evolutionary advantages to feeling nauseous when our inner ear is like off balance, and that was related to poison. So like that process, because like if you get poison, you start to feel like off balance and dizzy, and you start to feel nauseous, and that triggers you needing to throw up. So I wonder if there's some process within that that might also be tied to disgust, because I would think that like eating like inappropriate foods could also trigger that disgust reaction.
So you're wondering if the inner ear is somehow involved in just general disgust reactions, or that's really interesting. The vestibular system. I know a guy who studies motion sickness. I should ask him about that. That's really interesting.
Because a lot of your senses are all tied together. So your taste is tied to your mouth is tied to your ears, which is tied to your nose, and all of those. Like, they're all like tied
you
together.
would not be able to make facial expressions if that were really true. If your ear was tied to your nose.
But like if you eat something with your nose plugged, you can't taste it really as well, and those kinds of things, you know. And you hear better with your mouth open and stuff like that.
You know, I can't stand to eat a meal when there's loud music playing. It drives me nuts. It's too distracting. It's got to be the same thing. So that's a really interesting idea, and one that I think I'll ask Pete Gennaros about and see if he knows anything about that. Other people who are on deck today, who are you? I know Andrea. I know 2 people who aren't here, but there should be at least 2 others. Well, where the heck is everybody?
I can pull up the document if you want.
Yeah, do that. Let's openly shame the people. Naomi at least got in touch with me. She has a sick child, so she had to rescue him from school.
Having a hard time getting to it, sorry, just a sec.
I might even have it open already.
I have a question.
Yes.
If you were to eat, because you don't recognize that like a moldy lemon is disgusting or something like that, so if you were to eat that, wouldn't that cause like a visceral reaction?
You would think. Yeah.
It's like, I mean, yeah, you don't recognize it as disgusting, but it still tastes disgusting. Well, I guess you don't recognize that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So if somebody eats moldy lemons, moldy citrus is just really sickening.
Right.
So
you think it
if
would
a
just
person is
cause-
eating moldy food, wouldn't they get a stomachache right then and be turned off by it? So that suggests that there would be a learning problem as well, which you guys were talking about memory at the very beginning of this. So yeah, I don't know if maybe they're maybe they can't remember that it made them sick the last time. It seems really
Right, like-
unlikely.
Not just memory, but just the physical reaction that would happen in your stomach. You know, like.
Well, right then, but then what would keep you from eating moldy lemons the next time you found them in the refrigerator?
So you'd have a visceral reaction, and then you wouldn't learn from the experience, and you do it again.
I don't know. That's a really good question. I don't know. They certainly didn't address anything like that in the paper, but that's a really interesting thing that we probably could find out from interviewing caregivers of people with serious dementia. Yes.
Sherry, Stephanie, Naomi, and myself.
Okay. Sherry's not here. Stephanie is not here? You are here, okay, good.
So I did have a question, I just, I don't know if it was related to the topic. I know in the article it mentioned that OCD, that they measured OCD at the very beginning, and how it would discuss facial expressions. And then my question was, what if other disorders were measured? What would there be their response?
So what was do you remember what this is about? Because I can't remember that particular thing.
Yeah, people who had OCD showed more disgust in facial expressions than healthy adults.
Okay, so people with OCD tend to get disgusted more, or to at least express disgust more than people without OCD. So can you think of a reason why that might be the case? Yes.
Maybe they have more neurological connections in their interior insula.
And what is the behavior that we think of associated with OCD that might be prompted by feelings of disgust? Yeah, a lot of them are compulsive hand washers. They fear contamination. That's like a big thing for people with OCD. It's not the only thing, and not everyone has that, but it is pretty common. Yeah.
Well, I was just curious because, like, I feel like, I mean, I don't know many people with OCD, but I feel like there's certain people who do the, obsessive hand washing, but then other people, it's not about cleanliness, it's more about, like, everything has to be, like, arranged the same way. So, I mean, I would be surprised if they actually, I feel like that would be more of like an anxiety thing rather than like, I feel disgusted at my, like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if that was a feeling of disgust specifically.
So doesn't DSM consider OCD to be an anxiety disorder? It is, right? So maybe it's also a disgust disorder and we just don't think of it that way, at least for some people. I mean, that's actually something I never even thought of a single time before. That's really interesting.
And they, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
We were just learning about it at normal psych class, and like he mentioned specifically that people with OCD really don't feel anxious or disgusted, whatever you want to call it, at more things. It's just way more intense. So I don't know. So maybe that would be disgust, at like, I don't know how it would be, but like in some weird way, maybe they perceive it as a very intense feeling of disgust at like things being unfair.
It's interesting that, I mean, why would you think that they would show more expressions of disgust if they didn't feel disgust? I mean, does that make sense? Maybe there's something about OCD that translates anxiety into an expression of disgust. Huh.
Or maybe we don't understand anxiety.
Yes.
So to discuss how, like, just an aspect of how things are supposed to be, how you feel they're supposed to be, and that's why they're disgusted by kind of things aren't how they are. Like,
can you hear? Did you guys hear what she said? Can you say it louder, or do you want me to repeat it?
can you repeat it?
Yeah. She said that maybe disgust has an element of displeasure or unhappiness with things not being the way they should be. So if you are thinking of an emotion that would be brought about, it's almost time, that would be brought about in a situation where things just aren't as they should be, what would be, like, how would you describe that feeling if you had to pick one of the 6 basic emotions?
Probably anxiety.
You say anxiety?
Yeah, 'cause it's not like you're gonna vomit.
Or anger.
Yeah.
This pisses me off. Things aren't the way they're supposed to be. Yeah.
My Nana actually has OCD, and yeah, it's anger. It's
anger.
How it and I think that can also be kind of a personality thing too, like in how you display it. But when things aren't in the right spot, they're all out of place, and like she gets very angry about it.
So that's a really interesting idea, though. That might be where the connection is that would lead them to express more facial. Now I'm really interested in that, and I want to have a discussion about that, but it's time to go. So, all right. So next Thursday.